Okay. Namaste and Swasti, everyone. Thanks for joining. Um, the idea for this meeting or this workshop was that uh, CoHNA has been working on the swastika issue for a while now, maybe almost 4 years now, and and we have accomplished a lot. We have developed a lot of material. We have reached out to a lot of different uh, uh, counterparts, be it school administration, city administration, state governments, police departments, and so interfaith organizations, not just not just Hindu organizations, but other dharmic as well as Jewish and Native American leaders. So we have developed a lot of material, a lot of learnings along the way, and I think we are ready to take the next step now and to expand this effort much further, where we want to get to eventually. According to me, I think, and that's where we have to work together, is that it should become commonplace for everyone to use two different words in according to the context: Hakenkreuz and swastika. And if the context is of hate crime, then it is Hakenkreuz, and if the context is Diwali, then it is swastika. That is where we want to get to, and we are not there yet, and we have to work at different levels to that end. So the idea was that we'll have this workshop where we sort of all of us come together and again level set and on the same page, and then we take it forward and in a systematic manner. So the agenda for today is we have a presentation, and Nikunji will go through that, and we will then have we'll stop for questions in between, and we'll have hopefully I think we should have half an hour at the end for Q&A for us to um, uh, discuss the next steps and brainstorm. So with that, I'll Nikunji, should I share my screen and then the presentation?
I'm happy to do that. It's the same one that we're doing, right? The one I sent to you, right? That's the one.
That's the one, yes.
Okay, perfect. Give me 1 second. Let me just do something real quick, and then I can share it. Perfect. Okay. I need to unhide a slide. So, okay, I think that's good. All right, so let me know when you guys see my screen.
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first thing that I like to kind of remind people, and as when we present, this is something very important. You know, on this screen, you see all kinds of group shapes and symbols, and even both, right? So if you look at the left side, black symbol with 2 sticks, right? That could be a plus sign for someone. It could be something else for somebody else. And it's actually a very basic cross, okay? It's a Greek type of cross. There's a lot of different, but the same type of shape, if you had to look at it in red, you know, it immediately reminds you of a red cross, you know, very important symbol that you may have seen out there. If you make it a cross, like, you know, the X basically, so X marks the spot, is actually a Greek cross as well. And same thing, if you look at the right side, you know, if you put the similar type of the red cross looking symbol on a yellow you get a four-way symbol or four-way sign that's in the traffic lights and right next to a stop sign or something like that. At the bottom, you see three different types of other shapes. The inverted cross, as you see, is actually a cross of, I think, Saint Peter or someone, Saint Paul or someone. The middle cross is the iron cross that is, it derives its inspiration from a Christian cross. It's the Maltese cross, actually. But this is the iron cross that was used by the German army as part of their emblem. It's like a German military medal. And then, of course, on the right side, you see this popular, sort of plush sign looking, which is now is a cross. Of course, many people have seen this on churches and stuff like that. So the same shape, symbol, whatever you want to call it, when looked at it from different perspective, means a whole different thing to a whole different people. Okay, so a scientist may look at it as a plus sign. You can find it in petroglyphs in ancient civilizations and things like that. But for someone, it might be a cross. A lot of different things. So I like to let people know that when we are trying to explain to people that a shape that can be drawn in one way can mean totally different to someone else, and it's named differently. You won't call the right side as a cross, okay? You would call that a four-way stop sign, but it looks very, very similar to the red cross. Similarly, in the middle, that Maltese cross is a Maltese cross. It's not the iron cross that is used by Hitler's army, but they look the same. So some definitions is very important that we keep in mind. Two definitions, as Sandeepji mentioned. Swastika means that which brings good luck and well-being, and important to dharmic traditions. And I distinguish this is very important that we focus on the dharmic traditions, because the word is only used by Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs, potentially Zoroastrians, but let's just say these four traditions. This word occurs in the Vedas, swasti, as we say, in various classical Hindu literature, Vedas, various meanings, health, luck, prosperity, success, etc. So we should be stressing on the fact that this word is only used by four religions out there. Other cultures around the world that we have heard of use similar symbol but different name. Okay, this is also very important because swastika is not used. Who set up the caption to English? But anyways, that's besides the point. The other cultures around the world, as we know, Labaru, for example, in Basque / Europe, Silno Ali in Navajo tradition, Kode Emawar Iwa in African tradition, in the Akan traditions, in different ways, this is used. So it's called different by different, I would say, but all of these cultures focus on the sacredness, the benevolence, the prosperous, the health nature of this particular symbol. So essentially, this section of cultures uses this for sacred purposes. Now we turn to Hakenkreuz, and you've heard of this word, Hakenkreuz. Okay, Hakenkreuz is what you have to say. It's a German word, translates to hook cross, designed and used by Hitler and the Nazis. This is the symbol that is the bad one. Okay, it represents the most genocidal evil responsible for over 6 million Jews, extermination of 6 million Jews, and 1.5 million Romas and many others. Today, this brings trauma, fear, and pain in the hearts and minds of these communities. So Hakenkreuz is the word to be used. What's also important to keep in mind that we have to say that, look, swastika has been continuously used since the last 10,000 years at least. And together with what I call equivalent symbols, which means symbols that don't have the word swastika in it, but they are used for similar purposes, this is an extremely sacred symbol for close to 2 billion people, globally speaking. 1.3 billion Hindus, or 1.2 billion Hindus, let's say, whatever you want to say, or a billion Hindus, plus 500 million Buddhists, and everybody else. So close to 2 billion people consider this symbol sacred. Now, if you look at, this is something important. If you look at Japan, China, Tibet, Southeast Asia, and those cultures, this particular symbol in different ways. Remember, one of the things that I like to stress to people is saying, oh, well, people say, well, swastika is straight, Hitler's is a little bit this way, that way. No, it doesn't work. That's not how we have to look at it, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you look at the ubiquitous nature of this, in the middle, you see the swastika, or the manji, as they say in Japanese, inverted in red as part of a calligraphy, like basically language. Then they have this in Korea in a cafe. I believe this is Korea. It's like just like the Hakenkreuz. It looks like similar, very similar looking symbol right here. In the middle, you have the inverted cross, swastika or manji on Buddha's heart. Similarly, here you have the male and female. In Chinese tradition, you have male swastika as the straightforward one, and then the female swastika is sort of the counterclockwise or the of the flipped over. So this is also very important when people say, well, Hitler's swastika was this way, and our swastika said, no, it's not like that. Hitler's Hakenkreuz is a particular way, and our swastika is drawn in different ways. That means different things. And of course, as we look at Hindus, Buddhists, Jains in different ways, from babies, Mundan ceremonies, to temples, to the Jain, the main Jain symbol, to doors, to your car ceremonies. There's also Jewtown in Kochi that talks about swastik spices, the actual name. So not just the symbol, but the word itself, the word, the symbol, both are sacred to us. It's not necessarily only the symbol, but the actual word itself, because in our mantras, we don't draw a symbol. We actually say the mantra and we write it in Sanskrit. So that's also very important. Here's an example that I gave. This was my nephew was 1 year old yesterday. When he was born, during his sort of ceremony, a big swastika was drawn, and you can see my aunts putting him in the middle on the right side bottom. This is probably the most benign, innocent, sacred use that I can find in my family. Okay, this is like something that we do, and I bring this out to a lot of when we talk about how sacred this symbol is. A baby, newborn baby, after 14 years of trying in my family, was put on a swastika. So why would this be a hate symbol? Now let's turn to hooked cross. Many times people understand this idea of hooked cross, or many people find this idea new. So I wanted to kind of bring back why this is not such a new idea. So you can find this type of a symbol called hooked cross across the entire European and Middle Eastern places, which we'll talk about in a bit. But you can look at the hooked cross on the bishops on the left side, around 1366 in Winchester Cathedral. You can see the hooked cross, which looks very similar to the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh usage of swastika, right? So it's very important that people say, well, no, did it only come in Hitler? No, hooked crosses were used in Christianity before Hitler showed up. There's a church in Tampico, Mexico, right in the middle, in the sort of the walkway between the church pews, the aisles. There is a hooked cross like pattern all the way, and this looks very similar to what you see in Nazi literature. On the right side, this is a very ancient church from Lalibela in Ethiopia. It's called the Lalibela Church in Ethiopia. What's interesting here is you have four different types of crosses on there. You find the Maltese type of cross, you have the plus sign cross, you have the inverted hook cross, and you have a straight hook cross. And then there's also another sign, another cross in the middle, 5 actually. That's another Maltese cross, if I'm not mistaken. But there's another cross you can see right in the middle. So this priest is holding all types of crosses. That is also on a cross. So crosses inside a cross, if you look at this. And here it is. The Church of Lalibela, one of the walls actually has 4 different types of hooked crosses on there, or crosses. One is the regular plus sign type of thing. Then you have the X. Then you have the hooked cross. So, and then you see a priest, praying next to those crosses. So this is again a very important illustration of how hooked cross has been used in Christianity through the ages. Here's an example of cross that is in like a Philfot or Gamadian style in Europe. It's on the shields of the Knights Templar. You can find this in multiple places. The Finnish word for hooked cross is Hakarishti, which is also found in the president of Finland's national flag and things like that. So this hooked cross, again, has been around in Christianity and in Europe before even Hitler showed up, and not necessarily coming from India or anything like that per se. Like I said, Europe, you can see multiple places going all the way back to Greek, 350 BC, basically. On the right side, you can see that on the helmet. You can find it in other places. I talked about the Bishop William Eddington, Finnish Defense Ministry, Air Force. We used to use it before some controversies happened in Latvia. Here's Villa Romana de la Alameda in Palencia, Spain. You can see it in the mosaic tiles. You see it in Chechnya. so many different places. This has nothing to do with again, sort of somehow magically Hitler decided to bring it to India from India. Interestingly, in Israel and surrounding areas, you may find it. You also find hook cross. There's a mosaic at the Shavei Zion, the synagogue at El Kanatir, Capernaum synagogue. You can see that synagogue at Ein Gedi, for example. You also have it on the Tower of David. You have a stone from the Tower of David where there's a hooked cross, and of course the Byzantine Church in Jordan. So you can find these patterns of hook crosses across even in Israel and surrounding areas. Now, let's talk about the Hakenkreuz and the Nazis. So now we can see, number one, how sacred the swastika is for indigenous cultures. Then we saw the presence of hook crosses in Christianity. So I'll stop here for a minute or two and see if anybody had questions so far, and then we'll move forward. And I'm sorry if you're putting things in chat, I may not be able to see because I'm reading, I'm presenting.
I'll monitor the chat. So
I see Santiji's question now, yeah. The answer is no.
Okay. So he never referred to it as swastika.
No, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about next.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Can I?
Any other? Yes, Pramoji.
I have a slightly different kind of a question regarding the swastika.
Okay.
All through my life, when I was growing, we never called it swastika. Like,
okay.
It's the English way of calling swastika.
Yes, correct. Swastika, correct.
But if we have to go forward, and this is just a suggestion, I mean, you guys are all been working on this thing for a long time. I would still call it swastika. Maybe if we have gone beyond a certain point that we can't go back on the pronunciation, then it's fine. But it was just my suggestion.
Yes, and we do that. We do that in multiple ways. The reason I say swastika is because we want to make sure that, again, interestingly, I find this, again, semantics that other people use. So they'll say, well, let's call Hitler's symbol swastika, and let's call the Hindu symbol swastik, or let's call it swastika. And I said, I don't care. All of those words do not have anything to do with Hitler. So whether you call it swastika, swastik, swastika, all of these different permutations and combinations, they all mean the same thing. We just, tongue-wise and English versus, Sanskrit-wise, we call it differently. So yes, when we're talking to Hindus, generally we use swastik. But the reason we're using swastika is because of the fact that this is the word that we are trying to make sure that doesn't get connected to Hakenkreuz.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just add one more thing, that in one of the conferences we did, there was a suggestion, or someone pointed out that we can have two different spellings also, one with a W, other with a V, and that's all. So those kinds of arguments are in the bigger scheme where we are here. I think those are distractions, and the argument about it being tilted or not, the spelling, pronunciation. I think the bottom line we should be very clear. The bottom line is that swastika has nothing to do with Hitler, nothing to do with hate, and so no. Let's not lose that focus on and be very laser focused on that part.
Cool.
Yep. Yeah. So Nikunj, if I can just add one thing to that, I think it's a critical point to remember. Anytime we somehow, even by spelling, language, or whatever, somehow associate the word with the Nazis, even in a negative sense, it is accepting the premise that the swastika was appropriated by the Nazis and it was just misspelled or mistranslated or missed this or missed that. That premise is what is dangerous. That premise is what we are trying to break, right? So any kind of accommodation linking the swastika to the Nazi symbol in any form, whether it is spelling or sign or turned or direction or whatever, any one of those accommodations is defeating the purpose. We have to be absolutely, and as has been pointed out repeatedly, we have to be absolutely ruthless about ensuring that we never ever accept the premise that the swastika and the Nazi symbol Hakenkreuz are any way related, ever.
Yep. Yeah, Sangeeta ji, final point from you. I think you raised your hand. So
Oh, yes. Namaste. Just
Oops, we lost.
did we get cut off? You got cut off, I think. She might be having some technical difficulty.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Can you hear
Okay.
me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just regarding swastika versus swastik. We have to remember this is a Sanskrit word. This is not a Bengali word or Hindi word or Tamil word or something. This is Sanskrit. And so su asti ka, good bringing, and a good it is, and ka, like swasti is su plus asti, right? And just like that, ka is important as it brings it, right? So if we think of it in that sense, swastik versus swastika, there might be regional differences and things, but it's swastika in Sanskrit. And so we don't have to divorce from that because we didn't grow up with that and we said swastik instead, etc. Like those are all like, I think, non-points because the main word is still swastika, right? So
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that. Yeah.
Yep. In Gujarati, for example, we also have a word satyo.
Yeah.
So we use in Gujaratis call it satyo. So, I could be in my house, and if I say swastik to some people, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So they may say satyo. Oh, okay, now I know. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. So yes, those things make
Yeah.
it.
Because, and the other thing is, and regarding the look of it, before the look occurred, it's the shape. Not the shape, the sound.
Yes.
Like you said, in mantras, they don't talk about description this way with dots this way and cross and, tilted this way in this color. It's the vak, like it's the shabda of swastika, right? So
Right.
that's important. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for pointing that out. So now we understand that part. Now, how did this whole thing come about with the Hakenkreuz? So let's go back to the history and let's understand this kind of genesis of the Hakenkreuz versus the confusion with swastika. For us to do that, it's very important for many people to understand that anti-Semitism has a very long history within Europe and within the Christian tradition. So from the death of Jesus, which was blamed upon the Jews, and slightly before that, but let's say blaming the Jews for the death of Jesus, started this entire blame game. And the anti-Semitism is called the longest hate by those traditions for various reasons. So there's a lot of information out there. For example, I have a couple of journal articles that you can see here. They've been written by people. Christianity and the Holocaust. On the right side, you find this by this Shoshanikov. It's about Christianity's role in the Holocaust. This is from Boston University. So there's numerous. Even the American, the Jewish, the Holocaust Memorial Museum has an entire page on that, on the history of Christianity, Christian involvement of Christianity with the cross and the anti-Semitism and things like that. And what's really interesting is Martin Luther, who was the founder of the Protestant movement. And so, you have the Catholicism, right? And then there's a Protestant movement. So he basically, around 1543, he wrote a book called The Jews and Their Lies, which had a lot of negative, nasty, anti-Semitic information, blaming Jews, targeting them, so many things. And here's an excerpt from that book. Therefore, be on your guard against the Jews, knowing that wherever they have their synagogues, nothing is found but a den of devils, in which sheer self-glory, conceit, lies, blasphemy, and defaming of God and men are practiced most maliciously, and veheming his eyes on them. Okay, this is a direct quote from the book, The Jews and the Lies. So this was, if you think about the environment, 400 years before the Nazis were even around, you had hatred against the Jews. 1,000, 2,000 years ago, there was hatred against the Jews. And there have been genocides, particularly against the Jewish community over the years, by the way. So it's not like the Hitler's genocide was the only one. There have been genocides against the Jewish community for many, many years. And of course, the Holocaust being probably the most evil one of them. But there have been a series of different genocides. So it's very important to understand that there is a long history of Christianity's or the Christian sort of anti-Semitism environment within Europe and potentially around the world, but let's say from a European perspective. Then understanding the idea, now I'll use this word Aryan Jesus and I'll tell you why I'm using this, but the idea was that when Christianity was, when Hitler and the Nazis were experimenting with all these different ideas, they started to mix all kinds of nonsense together, okay? And one of the ideas they created was this idea that Jesus was Aryan, okay? And their idea of Aryan was obviously rooted in this racist Aryan invasion theory. But basically, they said Jesus was not a Jew, and they wanted to de-Judaize, as they say, Jesus, remove all the Christian connections, I mean, all the Jewish connections to Jesus. And they said, well, Jesus was really Aryan. He was a descendant, he was an Aryan descendant, and this is what we really need to aspire to. So there are all these books that have been written about it too. One of them is The Aryan Jesus by a professor from Dartmouth, Susanna Heschel, where she talks about the Christian theologians, how they used the Bible and created an interesting version of Christianity that was targeting Jews and others in Nazi Germany. But also, there are books that have written about the complicity of the church, the Pope, etc., in the Holocaust, and how there was new about it. There was a agreement between the church and the Nazis or Hitler called the Reich Concordat. Okay, the Reich Concordat was set up as an agreement where the Catholic Church was working with Nazis, just kind of a diplomatic agreement, even though they knew about what was going on. So there's a whole lot of group studies, research studies, scholarly books, etc., that have been written by various different types of people. And in, I think, 2015 and then 2020, I think, the Vatican archives were opened up to talk about the role of Pope Pius in this in Holocaust and things like that. So there's a lot of information that is out there about this idea that of the role of the Christian church in the Holocaust. Now, that doesn't mean all Christians are bad, no doubt about it, but there's a large role played, and I'm going to show you a very interesting example in a second. Here's a book. Here's a quote from the book called The Aryan Jesus. Check this out. When the Institute for the Study and Eradication of Jewish Influence on German church life was established in 1939 in order to purge Christianity of all Jewish accretions and restore it to its pristine Aryan origins, it drew on established theological arguments. Remember this, established theological arguments, as well as anti-Semitic traditions rooted in German culture and politics. In the 7th year of the Nazi regime and its anti-Semitic propaganda, de-Judaizing Christianity appealed as a sophisticated and avant-garde modernization of theology in keeping with the new political and cultural atmosphere of the Third Reich. So you can see the role that was being played based on existing theological arguments, not something new coming out of some foreign country 5,000 miles away or something like that. And what's important is, so before I get to this slide, here, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of bishops that were involved in this, okay, German church life, essentially. And there's this institute that for the eradication of the study and eradication of Jewish influence on German church life. That institute had hundreds of bishops, by the way, working full-time on this propaganda project. Now, what about Hitler? So now Hitler is a particularly interesting character because where he was born and where he studied, there was a place called Lambach in the Abbey in Austria. Now, there he used to see this hooked cross symbol every day. So one of the theories is that potentially that's where he really picked it up, because this was a symbol from 1869, of course, before his time, but at the same time was in 1869, this was dedicated to a guy named Theodor von Hagen. Okay, this guy was the bishop or whatever for that abbey some years ago, and his coat of arms had this Hakenkreuz on there. So that's the Theodor von Hagen had the Hakenkreuz. So Hitler will see this on a daily basis. He will expose this. There's a natural connection, a psychological connection that he started to establish to turn this kind of propaganda and create a powerful yet evil symbol. For him, this symbolized victory over Jesus's victory over death and persecution. So it's very important that we understand that. And now remember, German Christians were also aware of the Hakenkreuz's connections. So if you look at other types of logos of German Christian movement, they continue to have the Christian cross with the hooked cross together. Okay, so they didn't use the word, like they didn't use like only swastika or some sacred thing out there somewhere. They were very clear that this was a Christian symbol that they resonated with. Now, also important to keep in mind, there is no word swastika in the German language. I'm going to give you some words right here. Christian Kreuz is Christian cross. Hakenkreuz, again, hooked cross, Ritterkreuz, Knight's cross, Balkenkreuz, beam cross, Winkelkreuz, angle cross, Krummkreuz, crooked cross, Schwarzkreuz, iron cross, Eisenrestkreuz is also iron cross. Now, if you look at this pattern, you don't see the word swastika, right? You don't see that. What's important to keep in mind, but you do see all different types of kreuz. On the right side, you see Ritterkreuz, which is what I was showing you earlier, the iron cross in the beginning. This is where you see the hook cross and the iron cross mixed together. This is the symbol that was created by Hitler as the highest award in the military and paramilitary forces. So this is something to keep in mind, that there is no word swastika, but there are several words that connect the cross in different ways in Germany. Here's a Nazi propaganda that talks about Hakenkreuz. Gerhard Hahn, who was a prominent leader of the Lutheran Church of Hanover, he was talking about the solidarity between the Hakenkreuz and the Christian cross. So now he says, the cross of the Christ and the Hakenkreuz do not need to oppose each other and must not do so, but rather they can and should stand together. One should not dominate the other, but rather each should maintain its own meaning and significance. Both together, however, the cross of Christ and the Hakenkreuz admonish us, remember that you are German Christian people and should ever become more whole German Christian people and remain so. And on the right side, you see his book, Christus Kreuz und Hakenkreuz. So very clearly, you can see the connections being established between these two powerful symbols, but there's only one source behind it, is the idea that these are connected to Christianity and not connected to some foreign culture. Now imagine this guy was trying to arouse millions of Germans who were predominantly Protestants and then, of course, Catholics. Why would he use a foreign symbol of a pagan religion or a heathen religion to arouse people who are devoutly Christians? You can't do that. No one's going to believe you. So you have to also create a version that works for them. And that's why Hakenkreuz is connected to these things. And we saw that even before Nazis, you saw the connections of Hakenkreuz in churches and in the synagogues and things like that. Here's the German Red Cross. Again, very clear, right? The plus sign right in the middle and the left side. What is it called? It's called the Rotes Kreuz. Red Cross, Rotes Kreuz. And I have the German version of this because of the fact that in Germany, they do not use the word swastika here. They keep using Hakenkreuz. You can see that, and Rotes Kreuz and those types of words. Here are books that refer to Hakenkreuz. Das, on the left side, you see a different book that has Hakenkreuz. In the middle, you have the Christian Kreuz with Hakenkreuz. Again, talking about the two things. In the middle, another book. Right side, you have a bunch of books, again, referring to Hakenkreuz again and again. And you have a book, Hakenkreuz und Rotes Kreuz, which is also a book that talks about the role of the, I would say, the humanitarian, quote-unquote, organization during the Nazi Holocaust and all that stuff. So this is really, really important. Did Hitler ever use swastika? There's a question. So hopefully, you understand that, but very important. If he was aware of the word swastika, and if he cared about it so much, let's say even if he was aware of it, people say, oh, maybe he was aware. Okay, great. Let's say if he was aware. But if he was aware and he found that word to be very powerful, he should have used it. So here's the original text from Mein Kampf. Not once does he mention the word swastika. He does mention the word Aryan. So it's very, very important to keep in mind that while he's mentioning the word Aryan, if he thought that the word swastika was going to be important, he could have used it, but he didn't. So this first translation by E.T.S. Dugdale actually correctly translated the word Hakenkreuz into hooked cross and not swastika. Unfortunately, subsequent translations by other people like James Vincent Murphy, Ralph Mannheim, etc., incorrectly use the word swastika because it was just more convenient. But we can also understand why they don't want to use the word hooked cross to connect Christianity to this horrible series of events. Now, we talked about wrongful association. So now let's talk about this real quick. So not only Hitler, but 100 years ago, New York Times, when covering the rise of Hitler in Bavaria, talked about Hitler's followers. And when they mentioned that, they mentioned that Hitler's followers are called Hakenkreuzlers. And his movement was also called the Hakenkreuz movement. Why wasn't it called the Swastika movement? Or why weren't they called the Swastika men or some other name? Why were they called Hakenkreuzlers and the Hakenkreuz movement? Because there's a particular reason behind it. It was the Hakenkreuz. It is the Hakenkreuz. So 100 years ago, this is one of the first coverages. Now, all of a sudden, also another place you can see Hakenkreuz banner. Hakenkreuz banner was the Nazi newspaper from 1931 to 1945. Again, they're using the word Hakenkreuz. New York Times, April 18, 1934, also uses and mentions the word Hakenkreuz banner as the Nazi paper of Mannheim. We can see that the coverage is fairly clear. Now, did people use swastika? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. There was a whole lot of confusion, let's say. But one thing was very clear when it came to discussion about Hitler's followers, Hitler's, what do you call it, emblem, there was a word very specifically used called Hakenkreuz.
Hey, Nikunj, we also should point out, can you go back to that previous slide for 1 second? We should point out that eagle grasping the Hakenkreuz in its claws is a motif that appears throughout the Nazi regime.
Correct. That is a very important regime. Exactly. Yes. That is
Even
another very
banner,
important symbol.
Yeah, if you look at the other banner on top, the Hakenkreuz banner, the black one, you can see again the eagle grasping the hooked cross in its talons.
Correct.
So those the eagle was particularly important for Hitler.
Yes.
And because his hideout was actually called the Eagle's Nest.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So many different things that come up. Here's the Women's League. Again, Rotes Hakenkreuz. That's what the red hooked cross was their symbol. So I wanted to show that and also show this in actual German so that people understand how this was actually symbolized. All of a sudden, then around 1933, they started to put, even when they were still talking about this Hakenkreuz, all of a sudden, 1933, this is one of the first articles that became very popular, the swastika. Okay, this comes up and it says, hooked cross, an old symbol from India, the swastika made its way to Germany. Now, hooked cross is the old symbol, but somehow they're now talking about this. Now, in the middle, you can see by another decree, black and gold and red Republican colors were banished from the German. Now, in the right there, it says a flag that will probably incorporate the swastika in the old black, white, and red stripes. Hitler first foisted the swastika on Germany 10 years ago, interpreting it as a sign of youth and blah, 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 blah. So this started a major stream of misinformation in the media. And again, like I told you, before people were using, unfortunately, using the incorrect word swastika. But what ends up happening is media has powerful information. So when media starts to all of a sudden create this idea that hooked cross came from India, now you have a series of major misinformation and propaganda amplifying across the board. What's interesting is, oops, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, before you go further and go through this series of events, how Hakenkreuz changed into swastika, I wanted to ask one thing about the Christian connection, and which is very clear, the Christian connection of Nazis, of Hitler, and so on. And so one thing I have been asked somewhat obliquely at different events is that okay, if you talk about this, if you bring this point out strongly, then there will be resistance from the Christian side and in interfaith events, and this can become uncomfortable. I've not seen that explicitly so far. But what's your view and anyone else on this as we continue this campaign? And if that question comes up, what is our position?
Sure. So remember, and I obviously we respect the fact that everybody has their right to their opinions and stuff like that, but you can't change the truth. And these conversations, unfortunately, are tough and they are controversial and but they must happen. There has been a dialogue. By the way, most people don't know that one of the first interfaith dialogues, and the reason I call this one of the first interfaith ones and not dharmic dialogues, was between the Jews and the Christians. Okay, the whole idea of interfaith started with Jews and Christians because of the fact that Christians were butchering Jews. Okay, this was happening in medieval Europe, and as a result, the Jewish leadership sought to have a dialogue about the conversations between the two faiths. And then, of course, the interfaith dialogue started to include Muslims in different ways, but just so that people know that. So conversations have been going on, number one. Number two, even the Christians themselves have acknowledged this, Okay, the Pope has acknowledged it. The church's role in the Holocaust. There have been a series of dialogues. Actually, the Holocaust Museum hosted a dialogue on this very point a few years ago. So there have been already discussions going on. So it's not like Hindus are all of a sudden showing up and this conversation is happening. That's not true. These conversations have been happening since a long time, even during the Holocaust and even before that. Okay, so this is a continuation. So there's no such thing as, oh, it's going to become uncomfortable and it's going to be offensive and this and that. These conversations have been happening. Now, what's important is they haven't addressed the fact that this is a Christian symbol. And that's where we are coming in and saying, look, guys, you're having this conversation. Let's make sure that people are clear on the difference between the two.
I just wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we don't spend a lot of time. I know that everybody has comments and points to cover, but I want to make sure we stay true to time. So go ahead, Sudhaji. We'll keep moving unless somebody has a question.
No, I just wanted to say that the current Pope, just a couple of years ago, made it very public and part of the church's policy that the Jews were not the ones who killed Jesus Christ. That was huge because that was being used to abuse Jews. Secondly, like you said, the Jews and the Christians are continuing to have conversations. So we need to impress that and say it's in the same vein that we are having this conversation, because our role in any kind of Jewish life has been that of protection, not abuse. And we have to stress that. Most people don't know that. So anyway.
The one other answer which we have to be very, very clear about, and we should be willing to present it all the time, is societies and communities have come up and acknowledged that their symbols have been used for hate. For example, even today, the KKK is associated with the cross. There is nobody that says, why are you associating the KKK with Christianity? Right? Nobody argues that point. So the fact that somebody used the cross for the Holocaust is not necessarily something that, it's been never done before or anything like that. So when somebody says, well, aren't we going to have a problem with the Christians? Well, we should have a problem with the Christians for the KKK's cross burning too. But we don't have that because we put it in context.
Correct. Very important. Sangeeta, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that one thing is we shouldn't have to suppress ourselves in order to protect others. So if somebody's offended, okay, so be it. That doesn't mean that we would suppress our story for that, right? That's been going on long enough. The other thing is, if you're Christian, you should be offended by the Nazi misappropriation of your symbol, the cross. So you should actually get on board and say, not in my name too, right? Like, instead of saying we're offended, be like, Nazism misappropriated the cross, right?
Yep. Good point. Yep. Thank you. All right. So we talked a lot about, and there's a lot of history here. But I think for the sake of our time and for what we want to cover, these were some important points about how the narrative change happened and how it has been influenced. There's a lot more that we can discuss. There's when we go into deeper conversations, people bring up other things to discredit us. And I go back to the point that one very important point: did Hitler use the word swastika? If he never used the word swastika, just by that argument itself, we should make sure that we use the word that he used. End of story. So let's not drag a symbol that has nothing to do with Hitler's Hakenkreuz. So that's the argument that we should all be very clear on, number one. Number two is that there is a long anti-Semitic history in Europe. So we have to look at it from that context. All of a sudden, something coming out from some foreign country doesn't change the ground reality of things. Now, let's talk about the impact of this misinformation. If you look at Google Translate, you see all these different words that have been translated properly. But all of a sudden, you find Hakenkreuz as Nazi swastika. Okay, so Haken means hook, Kreuz means cross, but then Hakenkreuz, when you combine the two, apparently becomes Nazi swastika. So you can start to see the problem that we face here. So every time you go and read a German to English translation, they will keep talking about swastika or Nazi swastika. Just FYI, this used to be only swastika. So if you ever go back to my original article that I had written back in 2020, you will see the screenshot from Google Translate that only uses the word swastika. So over the past few years, they have started to pick up on this because, people have submitted things, etc. So they have come to Nazi swastika, but not fully going to Hakenkreuz yet. So, or hooked cross. So we have to work on that. But one of the interesting part or sad part was back in the days, about in the 1940s, thanks to the prevailing misinformation, 4 Native American tribes came together and signed a proclamation that says that we will forever let go of the word, of the usage of our sacred symbol. Now, you can see even today, this was in St. Louis, Salt Lake City market, this Native American rug was considered as a symbol of hate. So essentially what happened was a bunch of people showed up and they were basically, told not to display this because this is a Nazi symbol. So that's what the impact of misinformation does. We also have...
Sorry, it's also fascinating to see the juxtaposition, right? The previous New York Times article says the ancient Indian symbol was imported as a swastika. Now it's talking about Indians denounce Nazis. If you look at just the headlines, you would think that people in India are denouncing Nazis. Now here they're talking about Native Americans.
Yep.
So they confuse
That's the other thing.
they confuse everything into the same term, and then people get confused.
Yep. Oh yeah. So again, even in ADL's language, there's basically, if you look at their report, basically says, hey, report if you see swastika in the school. No context. Just saying, report anti-Semitic incidents, click swastika and report that there was a swastika spotting. And so you can see, and then you have the middle school and high school guides. It says, in 1920, Hitler adopted the swastika as the primary symbol for the Nazi party in Germany and included the symbol on the Nazi flag. So their unfortunate stance is that Hitler used the swastika. Now, of course, that's not accurate, so we have to work on that. This is back in Atlanta area. East Cobb Middle School was wearing a quote-unquote swastika, and you have this billboard that was created by this group called Jew Belong all over Atlanta. Says, if Atlanta's too busy to hate, why is there a swastika at my kid's school? Okay. Now, this is the kind of complete out of context stuff that people put out because that's what they're used to. Now, the problem here is that there is no conversation. And when we start to have conversations, things change. So this is an example of how a Hindu student wearing a swastika or having some kind of swastika could be targeted as anti-Semitic when this is a hooked cross and not a swastika. A very famous situation happened when we were having this fight within the school, the state of New York, where they were trying to declare swastika as a symbol of hate, to be taught as a symbol of hate in schools. A girl named Simran Tatuskar from Brandeis University was targeted because and accused of anti-Semitism because she basically said that we need to make sure that the Hindu swastika is basically included in school curriculum. Just for asking that, hey, you need to make sure that you include the fact that swastika is a Hindu symbol and a sacred symbol. Now, what's important is who was targeting her. It was actually a Jewish organization called Stop Anti-Semitism. And they launched a massive campaign against her that resulted in her resigning. And she went through a lot of trauma. And, luckily one rabbi came to her kind of like, not her rescue, but like just to support her and stuff. And then he wrote an article about the fact that this is not a symbol of hate. Unfortunately, he still used the word swastika for Hitler, but that's different. But at least he came out and did that. So there is some real life problem here. Similarly, a student at George Washington University, a Jewish student who had gone to India and picked up swastika and displayed it as a souvenir, was suspended from George Washington University. So Hindu organizations got involved and helped this Jewish student get back into the school. So you can see a real problem here. It's not just now you're talking. Across the board, you find in Clifton, New Jersey, this was again referred to as a symbol of hate, and it was mistaken for that. A gas station owner also had the problem. He was basically accused of supporting hate. This was in Manalapan, New Jersey, right next to my house here, about 10 minutes away. And then on the right side was another 2022 article where an entire summer camp was shut down because staffers quit. And they said that we're not going to work here, a place that displays the swastika. Even though you can see that the swastika in this particular situation, and don't look at this image because this is from a Hindu temple, but the symbol that they had was from a pre-Nazi era, and it was a Buddhist symbol. And the owners of that place also tried to explain to the employees that this has nothing to do with swastika, is actually a pre-German symbol. But they didn't want to do anything. They just quit. Now 400 kids were stuck. On the left side, those are two of my friends. They were featured in this Associated Press article where they had been targeted. So like during Diwali, they had a swastika. Their co-op managers or supervisors came to them and told them that you need to remove this immediately because it's offensive to all the Jewish people staying there. So this is a real deal. Same thing on the cars. A bunch of places where they had car ceremonies, you had a problem. People thought this was actually Nazi vandalism, or there was a police complaint on that. Same thing on the flags in Vancouver. There was a whole discussion about, oh, should Hindus display this? So this was a homeowner who displayed a Hindu flag, basically, right? So a delivery man defaced a swastika because he thought this was a Nazi symbol. All these things go on across the board. So this is real impact on people from the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, even Sikhs to an extent use swastika, things like that. But in some places you have different types of dynamics. One place they decided to change the word swastika trail, Ontario, to say, well, we're going to change this and now we're not going to call this. But another place in New York, they voted to keep the name because the people there were very clear that this is not a symbol of hate. This word was before the Nazis were there. This has nothing to do with that. And we actually had one of the supervisors I had a conversation with, and he was saying, when I was growing up, before, in the Nazi era, my dad used to collect a whole lot of coins and stuff like that. And they used to have this swastika symbol on there. So again, this was from the horse's mouth per se. Then there's a whole idea of why the swastika can't be rehabilitated. Hitler co-opted for the symbol. Redeeming is difficult. There is nothing to redeem because we never stopped using it. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Here's a Quebec village that refused to remove swastika because it was part of this anchor that was pre-Nazi. So they said, nope, this is a sort of part of history and we're going to keep it here. What has been CoHNA's effort? So a lot of times, and this is very important for people to understand, that people, when people love to question us and question organizational efforts, they say, I'll just go and do it myself. What is CoHNA's, what CoHNA's credentials, what are the CoHNA's credentials in this particular situation? So I decided that we're going to talk about that so that people are equipped to see what we have done so far. One of the biggest achievements is the Swastika Awareness Coalition, which was an initiative that was started by 4 organizations: the Buddhist Council of New York, CoHNA, Hewa Peace and Reconciliation Foundation of New York, and the U.S. Hindu Alliance, where we came together and make sure that we, as dharmic organizations, provide this common understanding, first of all, between us, and then in the broader community, and make sure that people distinguish the Nazi Hakenkreuz from the symbol that is sacred to us, which is swastika. So the Swastika Awareness Coalition was formed in 2022, and we've done a lot of good work there. Here's the Swastika Proclamation unveiling that was in 2022, where 16 spiritual leaders from Hindus, Buddhists, Jain, and Native American traditions came and signed. And this became a sort of a guiding light for us across the board for our work now going forward. So this is really, really critical for us to understand. This is the first time, at least that I've been here in this US for 30 plus years, that I have seen this type of a group coming together for swastika. So far, New York City, one of the biggest things that happened 3 Fridays ago, that after 1 year's work between SAC and CoHNA, the New York Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes removed the misinformation on the swastika from their page. Now, this is critical because for so many years, we've had this misinformation sitting there and they have not removed it. Now, they have decided to partner with CoHNA to work on getting a better language as well as addressing other issues. Our research has been used by the Hindu Council of Australia to work with Jewish organizations and pass one of the first laws in the world in the Victorian province that clearly distinguishes between the swastika and the Hakenkreuz. This is one of the best outcomes out there because an official body, a law that actually talks about this. After 2 decades, famous designer Stephen Heller changes his stance because of discussions with Dr. T.K. Nakagaki and CoHNA. And some of you may have seen this article where he had a dialogue with me, Pushpita Ji, Dr. Nakagaki, and Jeff Kelman, who is a Jewish scholar. And of course, we have been working with different groups to defeat bills in New Jersey and New York that would declare swastika as a symbol of hate in schools. We also did this in California. We had a partial win. So I haven't put that there, but we had a partial win where we at least, thanks to the efforts of all the Hindu organizations, not just CoHNA, we were able to change some things. But unfortunately, because of some dynamics between different Hindu organizations, they continue to call this the Nazi swastika. So that word did not go away. Hopefully we do that. We have educated several school districts, I think 10 to 12 school districts in North America about the difference between the sacred symbol and the symbol of hate. And we have, of course, participated in multiple interfaith meetings, dialogues, conversations, seminars, as well as conferences on this topic. So we have had a significant, this is one of the flagship projects of CoHNA for the last almost 4 years since we've been born. We've been working on this project, and we can safely say that we are one of the organizations that has the most amount of research and information and work on this particular topic. Of course, our resources have been used by many places. So if you haven't seen The Silence of the Swastika, you should take a look at it. Chandra Aryaji used this swastika booklet. He gave it to everybody in all members of parliaments and senators in Canada. And then in this Manji is coming up. So it's a documentary that features Dr. T.K. Nakagaki, where he talks about his journey in Japan and the interfaith dialogue he's been having on this. So we should also promote that. This is something that we will bring up to everybody, because it's a nice thing to see like a Japanese Buddhist monk talking about this versus a bunch of Hindus only talking about it. So this festival, different film festivals are featuring his documentary called Manji. Some final thoughts that I want to lay. Words and context matter. As I mentioned from the slide 1, shapes may look similar, but symbols and their uses can have radically different meanings. Hitler never used the word swastika. He always used the word Hakenkreuz, which means hooked cross. Swastika is a Sanskrit word, so make sure we use the right terminology for the symbol of hate while standing with the Jewish community and others and denouncing hate. Hitler never misappropriated swastika. So when we say Hitler misappropriated it, that's not true. He did misappropriate a top of cross, and he used it for his genocidal campaign. There is a plethora of scholarship that shows Hitler and the Nazis drew from Christianity and the prevailing anti-Semitism in Germany at the time. And we showed some examples of that. Using the word swastika to...
Because I think we may want to revisit this particular line. Instead of saying he did misappropriate, maybe we should say he may have misappropriated a type of cross. Because I don't think we want to authoritatively assert that he did do it, but we might just point them to say, hey, he may have misappropriated cross. I don't care.
Yeah, sure, we can change that. So he may have. And then a plethora of scholarship exists, like I said, about this whole topic. Now, when we use the word swastika to describe Hitler's symbol and current day hate, it can actually trigger hatred and bigotry against Dharmic religious traditions and students who have been using this sacred symbol for thousands of years. So when you keep using this word, it's actually causing harm and potential safety issues for people, especially students who are from Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, origins, who use this sacred symbol and have been using it for thousands of years. So these are some key takeaways that we need to keep in mind. Now, another piece that I want to show also to people, nothing to reclaim, redeem, or save. So when you start to say, we want to redeem swastika or reclaim it, or we want to save it, no, we don't want to do that. You only reclaim things that you have given up, or save things or redeem things that are evil or bad, right? This is like a very Christian, again, idea of redemption and things like that. So we don't have reclamation or redemption or saving of anything. We never give it up. We use it today. We have been using it for thousands of years. All we are asking is to simply delink the false association between the two. This promotes mutual respect and proper understanding. I shouldn't say property. I should say proper understanding about cultures while condemning bigotry, hatred, and anti-Semitism. So we are condemning. We are with the Jewish community. We have been supporting the Jewish community. We want to condemn anti-Semitism, bigotry, hate in all forms. But we need to make sure that we are asking to delink the two. They are not connected. Let's make sure that we don't trigger hatred against communities who have been using the swastika for so many years. And let's call it what it is, what Hitler called it. And context matters. On the left side, you see different types of usage of symbols to do something horrible. These are symbols of hate. And it's interestingly, you see in the middle, you have the hooked crosses in different ways. You have the iron cross, as you can see, And then the Hakenkreuz, the Nazi emblem right in the middle. You have the burning cross. And then on the top, I remind people that, and I have to put another picture here of a Hindu temple being vandalized in Washington state using the Hakenkreuz. So what an irony that you have a Hakenkreuz painted on a Hindu temple by some vandals and with the words "Get out." About 100 feet from there is probably sitting in the middle of our temple. Probably there's swastika there. So that's the irony of this. And I'm going to add that to this because I want to showcase that it's not like, oh, Hindus never, face this. So we face the same thing. On the right side, these are sacred symbols without a question. When you see the symbol in that particular context, you have a particular word for it, whether it's a sacred cross or swastika or manji and things like that. So context matters. And this is an important slide that I wanted to kind of share with people. So we also have some information that we have created. We created this infographic that you can find on the website. If you go to kohna.org/swastika or understanding-swastika.org, you can download information, articles, infographics, things like that about swastika versus Hakenkreuz. And you see this here, this infographic again, created so far, and some resources that I highly recommend all of you take a look at it, read it. There's an academic paper by Jeff Kelman, who has done some research on this, and he's a genocide scholar, so a Jewish scholar talking about this, very important. My original article is there. If you get a chance, you can read Dr. Nakagaki's book on Buddhist swastika and Hitler's cross. There are other books. Dr. Daniel Rancourt-Lafarrière, he's a professor emeritus from UC Davis, and he has written this book called The Sign of the Cross, From Golgotha to Genocide, where he actually talks about the history of the cross from like the birth all the way till the genocide and how it has been used in different ways. In there, he actually talks about, he says Hitler's cross, Hitler's Hakenkreuz was not some swastika that was brought from outside. It was very much a cross. So you have an expert on Christianity talking about this very clearly. And that's pretty much it. So I'll stop here and I'll open it up for some Q&A or anything that people want to ask.
Nikunj, can I just add one thing before we go to Q&A?
Yep.
One of the things that we should remember is this is not intended just for the Western audience. This is also for Hindu Americans, your friends, your families, your people at work, because there is a tremendous amount of misinformation. I mean, I did not know anything about this 3 years ago. Okay, it took me enough education to kind of finally realize that this was not about appropriation or anything like that. They just didn't have anything to do with each other, right? And we need to propagate that. We need to propagate that particular notion, even especially within the Indian American, Hindu American community, because oftentimes we concede the argument in public that Hitler appropriated it. So we need to, so don't be limited by who you take this to. You should take it to everybody.
Yep, exactly. Now, what's important to keep in mind is also we have been colonized. See, many people say, well, why this is why are you talking about this today? Well, first of all, when you start talking about it is when you start to change it, number one. But more importantly, Hindus and Indians in general were only independent in 1947. So we never had a perspective of our own, per se. And we have been colonized. So when you're colonized, your education system, your thought process, etc., is of that of the conqueror in many ways. So only after so many years, there has been a concerted effort to change the dynamic and the narrative. And as Sureshji said before, like to be very honest, when I started working on this in CoHNA, even I was confused. And I was like, oh, maybe Hitler did use it or something. So I spent about 6 months doing research on this topic. And I concluded that no, he didn't use it. Whether he knew about it or not is not the point. People can know about it. Whether you're using it, to the dictator, what did this symbol symbolize? Did they symbolize some Sanskrit deities, or did it symbolize the death and persecution of Jesus? And that's the difference between the two.
In one of the conferences that we did, it was, I think, very poignant moment at that time, that it was pointed out that we are probably the last generation that we still have some Holocaust survivors among us. And Dr. T.K. Nakagaki's thesis advisor is a Holocaust survivor, and we had her on one of our conferences, and she's with us. She completely understands our position. We had Dr. Alan Grill, another Jewish
Yeah.
Jewish scholar, and he made the point that the Jews were really more terrified of the Christian cross, not terrified, not as terrified of the Haken Cruz than they were of the Christian cross. So we have this opportunity now to collect all this sort of testimonials and package it properly and make the case and set the record straight. So I think we only have 5 more minutes. I think I wanted Nikunji, your thoughts on what the next steps are, particularly the proclamation. I think that is definitely one of the greatest hits of CoHNA, and to coming up with such a document, a single pager, which captures all that needs to be said on this topic, and where we have endorsement from maybe around 50 organizations so far. We should get that number higher, as high as possible, and so that when we go out and talk to people, and that comes back to the credibility of CoHNA. We have come up with a document which has support across traditions, and which is endorsed by, let's say, 100 organizations in North America, or something on those lines. And yeah, so your thoughts?
No, your target is right there. As volunteers of CoHNA, whether you are part of the Swastika team or not, 100 organizations should be signing this Swastika proclamation. So we will provide the scripts. Sandeep ji and Deepali ji and the team will provide the script of what to say. We need Hindu, Buddhist, Jain organizations to sign this, Dharmic organizations, because this is a Swastika Awareness Coalition, Native American groups, Zoroastrians, anyone who uses swastika and its equivalent symbol for those types of purposes. So let's make sure we get those. That's a very important. It could take 5 minutes for someone to be convinced, or it may take a few months or whatever is necessary. But 100 organizations is what we want by the end of 2024. If we can get more, that's great.
What about the HMEC, the temple?
Yeah.
1,000 temple. We should go after them. I mean, I don't understand why we give them a pass. Or
yes, I think that's a big opportunity to work together with HMEC, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and I've had conversations with Jay Bansal ji and Tejal Shah ji. They are signatories to the proclamation, and so that's a joint effort that CoHNA can take on with VHPA, with HMEC.
Yeah.
We need to see them sign first. I'm just saying. Okay.
They have signed it.
They have signed it.
They have signed it. They're one of the signatories on that. So VHPA. Okay. Who else?
Yeah, Nikunji, great, very well researched presentation. That's pretty obvious, and I know you spent 6 months. I was just wondering, when you were researching it, did you look into any of the biographies of Hitler?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that's could be, if we have very clear-cut indication somewhere from an authoritative source that he was never introduced to the word swastika, or at least his inspiration came from that cross that he saw on the door of that church in Austria. That clinches the whole thing, in my opinion.
It's in my article.
All right.
Robert Payne, Robert Payne, one of the biographers of Hitler, actually talks exactly that. So there are 2 different sources that I quote, and he mentions the fact that Hitler, as a young boy, used to go there, and that he uses the word swastika because it's an English translation. Right. So he uses says that swastika is probably the one from the Hagen, Theodor von Hagen. So I kind of said, well, that's not a swastika. So I said this symbol. So anyways, you can take a look at that. Yes.
Where
You
can
know,
I
I
find the
just
article?
CoHNA.org/swastika. And you go down, you'll find it. It says wrongfully accused. That's the
Thank you.
title.
Thank you.
I just want to say that we should this thing about Hitler suddenly seeing this is not the way it happened. For 2,000 years, Christians have used the cross to abuse the Jews. That is the history of Europe. You know, the discrimination against them, maligning them. That is a European culture. And it's not Hitler suddenly deciding, oh, I see this cross, let me use it. No, I think we need to stress that fact. It is not part of our culture to abuse anybody, but it is a culture of Europe that abuses everybody else, especially the Jews.
Yeah, I'm going to show you. I'm going to share my screen real quick for a second. Here's a book that I was talking about, the Daniel Rancourt-Lacfarier's book. Take a look at it. This is from the Google search. Okay, Google Books. And now this book is very expensive, $138. So I want to show something here. This is a page 4 or whatever page this is. Here says that he starts here. Furthermore, like, so if you go up here a little bit, he's talking about Robert Payne right there. Okay, so hooked cross of the Lambeth Monastery. Okay. Earlier in Mein Kampf, Hitler recalls there was a child spent in this where he first dwelt like this to play outdoors and blah, blah, blah. He would intoxicate myself in the solemn brilliance of church festivals and blah, blah, blah. Hitler admits to a temporary aspiration for this profession, an old friend who survived, all this good stuff. Okay. Now, what does this childhood religious enthusiasm have to do with Christian cross? Robert Payne, as I mentioned, one of the Hitler's many biographers, makes some interesting remarks about the influence of the Lambeck Monastery on Hitler's later development. You can go over here and read it, but it says visitors to the monastery have observed one curious and memorable detail, even 6 or even 7 places over the ornamental gateway or stone wall, over some of the stalls in the abbey, a swastika appears. Okay, so you can get rid of that word swastika for a second. Swastika was included in the coat of arms of Abbot Theodorich von Hagen, who ruled over the monastery in the 50s and 60s. In German, a swastika is a Hakenkreuz, and evidently, the abbot regarded as a pun on his own name, the difference between Haken and Hagen being so small that it might have passed unobserved. The abbot's swastika inspires no fear. It was carved delicately, blah, blah, blah. Adolf, who was now living in a well-designed building at the corner of this and this, could see the Hakenkreuz from the window of his father's apartment, and he saw it more clearly when he went to school. Theodor von Hagen's swastika, as he says, was probably the ancestor of the Nazi Hakenkreuz. This is a hypothesis, probably, and some of them who have studied may have stated contrary opinion. For example, this unqualified assertion by historical. This Bradley Smith says, no, it's not true. Okay. Now, Dr. Rancourt says otherwise. Furthermore, the fact that Smith's hypothesis is stated by means of misleading English term swastika, quote unquote, rather than a term that would have been more accurately reflected in Hitler's childhood linguistic and religious studies, Hakenkreuz or hook cross, also gives pause. Any native speaker of German intuitively understands that the infamous term derives from Haken, hook, and Kreuz, cross. Without this understanding, the rhetorical device of polyplotaton could not have been utilized in German titles like Christenkreuz and Hakenkreuz, Kreuz und Hakenkreuz, Christenkreuz und Hakenkreuz. He gives so many examples. There's a Berlin exhibition that was called Christenkreuz und Hakenkreuz during the Nazi period, and many others. It cannot be disputed that as a boy, Hitler repeatedly saw the hooked cross in the Christian context of the Benedictine Catholic monastery where he had his choir lessons and other classes. This experience may not have been influence's choice, but nowhere in Mein Kampf does it come down. Hitler refers to the specifically, yes, in this, yet in an early notebook, we find a sketch of a projected book cover which features a hooked cross on a flag, which looks rather like what would have become the Nazi banner. And then blah, 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 he goes on, many different things he says. Then he actually says in the front here, linking the Nazi Hakenkreuz to the Christian cross. So there's a whole thing here. He says, part of the answer lies, a Hakenkreuz is not a swastika. This was really a hooked cross. So this whole section basically talks about this whole topic about how it's nothing to do with swastika, but it's actually a cross. So that's the beauty of the research that we have found. And I am convinced, like I said, that it is not the swastika per se, as we know it. It's the Hakenkreuz. So that's all for today. Any other questions that people may have?
Nikunj, I sent you an email to Shobha, you and everybody from that David. He brings up a very good point. Charles Lindbergh was a Nazi sympathizer, so we should remove anything about his plane and the swastika symbol, because that would be confusing.
Sure, but the idea was, remember, it was not used by us.
I know,
anyways,
but we putting that thing out there is a confusing concept.
I'm
That's
happy
the
to
whole
take a
idea.
look at what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
One question I did have, I think that the people had asked. Okay, so let's say if I spot if my child, a couple of things, two questions, and these are the answers I want to give. Question number one is, what if I see a Hakenkreuz carved on a desk or somewhere? What do I do? Okay, now you can go and report it to the authorities, right? You can report it to the authorities, you can report it to the school teachers, etc. But using the word Hakenkreuz and say, hey, Nazi, I found a Nazi symbol. Don't go and say I found a swastika. Found a Nazi symbol, spray painted, and blah, 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 graffiti, carved in, whatever you want to say. So that's very important. Report it in different ways. You can report it through the police channels, through other channels, etc. But another one, let's say a school sends out a memo that says that, hey, we found a swastika carved on a desk, and this creates trauma for the Jewish groups and communities and things like that. What do you do? Step one, contact us. Find out where this data was, where it's coming from, what the incident was, get some context, who the parent was, who the kid was, whatever, who reported this, etc., if possible. Second thing is, once you connect, let's talk about it. We can come up with a game plan. Second step would be to then reach out to the school principal and the school administration that says, hey, you sent out this memo that says swastika. However, this is not a swastika, it's a Nazi symbol that is called the Hakenkreuz. And here's some information. We would love to have a conversation with you, because it causes the wrong usage of the word causes trauma and fear, as well as a denial of rights for the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, different types of groups that have been using this symbol in a sacred context. And it is only called swastika by these groups. So reaching out and having that conversation with the school administration is really important. And then bringing CoHNA in and stuff like that. And we can discuss how to then go about it. We don't want to sue anybody. That's not the idea, because some people take this the wrong way. There's no suing the Jewish community, please. The second thing is, dialogue is very important. First, you only pull a legal stunt, if you want to say it, once all dialogue fails, right? And it becomes very serious. First thing to do is make sure that we have the dialogue, and then we proceed further. Rakeshji, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one other point should be added is that this misassignment or improper assignment of this symbol to Hinduism could also potentially lead to some kind of discord between Jewish and Hindu communities. And so I mean, that's also pretty real, I think.
Yeah, and it has. To be very honest, it has, in a way, where we failed to pass the bill in New York because the New York Board of Rabbis and us, we did not agree on 3 words, just 3 words, incorrectly known as, because they refused to insert that into the language. They could have contextualized it, and we would have been done with it,
right?
But they did not, so it failed. We stood our ground, they stood their ground, and there was an impasse, and that's okay. We don't have to agree with everybody. We respectfully disagree, and we move forward. But then there have been older dialogues, that the Hindu-Jewish summits of 2007, 2008, that have had some initial conversations about the sacredness of the symbol and the racist Aryan invasion theory and things like that. Sangeeta ji, go ahead.
Hi. Just a couple of things. One is that I think we also need to keep emphasizing that this is our rights as members of the society. This is our legal right to use our symbol as we see fit. It's a religious right that is unalienable. And that's one thing we don't say enough, I think, sometimes, because we're trying to convince people. We don't actually have to convince anybody. That's one thing. And we're actually doing them a favor, because be educated, right? But the other thing is also educating our own group, like Hindus, especially immigrant populations who are easily intimidated by HR who says wash your car or something like that, right? Like, oh, I guess we're not allowed to. No, you're absolutely allowed to, as members of the society, to do your religious symbols. And as far as also educating Hindus, one thing is some Hindus, and they don't mean harm. They're actually on our side, but they're saying things like, "Oh, our swastika would never be black. Our swastika would never be tilted, etc. It would always have dots. It's this way, that way. It's we have it's those might be traditional how your mom taught you and all that stuff, but there's no shastra saying that this has to be only this way. The only thing that's set in stone is the word swastika, that sound. Like the look is kind of irrelevant in this case sometimes, right? So I think that's one thing that we have to focus on as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course. No, I agree. Pushpita ji, go ahead.
Just building on what Sangeeta ji was saying, because I think we talked a lot about how to handle pushback from the Jewish community. But also sometimes the biggest problem is our own community, with people saying, just let it be, and what's the harm? Or even well-meaning non-Indian allies who say, tackle this later. And I want to emphasize the urgency of tackling it now. It should have actually been tackled 50 years ago. Because the problem, kicking the can down the road, is going to make it worse, not better. And just think about it humanly, right? So right now you still have people who survived the Holocaust, and you can try, or people with whose parents were survivors. So it's more direct, and it's easier to get people who have lived through something change versus ask somebody to change what they heard their parents or grandparents say. You can never convince me that what my mom told me was not what I heard. That becomes very emotional. So the time to tackle this is very urgent as the survivors kind of die out. And as this is a tech heavy crowd, so you all know what's going on with AI, with machine learning and everything else. And if you can see the problem that has happened with just one New York Times article of 1930s, what's going to happen once this is baked into AI and machine learning, right? So kicking the can down the road is really not a luxury that we have. And that is really important to tell to well-meaning Hindus or Indians who just want to let's just wait and it'll become better.
Yeah, we need to be proactive, not reactive. That's been our problem for the longest.
No, but I want to convey the urgency of that, because you have to tackle this issue as more and more stuff gets baked into institutional frameworks that are really hard to change. In the case of Google, right? And I can just, so Google mistranslates the Hakenkreuz into, it's on our websites, right? So if you put in Haken, it says hooked. If you put in Kreuz, it says cross. But if you put in the word Hakenkreuz, the German to English Google translator spits out Hakenkreuz. And it's not just CoHNA. There have been internal efforts at Google from Hindu employees to change that. And they have not succeeded so far. Let me just put it that way, right? So institutional stuff is really hard to change. And so we really need to stop this getting institutionalized more and more places. So I'm just trying to convey the urgency of what's going on. So that's one problem. And the other problem, of course, is the people against Hindus are happily using this misunderstanding to go ahead and basically create more of this confusion and try to build an understanding that yes, Hitler indeed was inspired by Hinduism. And it becomes an easy push for them, because if you are 99% or 95% of the world and you really don't know any of this and you really don't care, all that you see is the swastika, the word swastika, and the symbol, and what Hitler used is exactly what you see. So it's very normal to make that connection. You're not going to sit here and listen to us for an hour and understand. So it just makes sense, and you're never going to question it. So if a white nationalist wants to say that, Hitler was inspired by Hinduism, or Audrey Trotsky wants to say things like that, you're never going to question it. It sounds logical.
Yep. And it has been. And if you look at the Equality Labs, the second video that we have done, there is a guy there, Chinnaya Jangam. He basically says that. He says, there's a swastika in Hinduism, and Hitler was inspired. Hitler the Hindu nationalists were inspired by Hitler, by Nazis. So you can see that connection being made right there. So it's not like a hypothetical scenario. Okay, I think we're good. Sandeepji, anything else?
I just have one other question too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, just regarding since we're talking about the church one for a little bit, do we say anything about what seems like a concerted effort by the church to, cover their involvement in Nazism, right? So that's a separate, maybe a whole different topic, because really, when you think about symbols that have been used for violence, what is more violent than the actual Christian cross? Forget about the misappropriated one. The actual Christian cross has been the symbol under which millions of people have been killed. And then also, of course, the crescent moon and star. So, and there's no attempts to ban those two, right? So it's kind of very like pointing out that hypocrisy, even if you don't go too much into it. Like I think it's important to point out that hypocrisy.
Oh yeah, I mean, totally. And
Yeah.
we all have to understand that there is a hypocrisy, and always keep in mind that this is the challenge that we have been facing for so many years, right? This whole concept of like creating just keeping information where it doesn't belong, right? It's like there's a word for it, which I'm not recollecting right now, but there's a word for it, where people deflect it, basically, to get rid of the stuff that that is blaming them. They just like a whataboutery in a way, but still there's a different word to be used, which I can't find right now in my head. Okay, I think
Okay, I
that's
think to wrap up, I just want to mention that there is a Swastika Task Force WhatsApp group. So if you want to work further, help us out on this, then Dipali ji is the project leader. I'm helping her on this. So get in touch with either of us, and we'll add you to that task force, and we'll take it forward from there. Shri Sivani. Okay, he just dropped off. All right. I think you wanted to say something, Shri?
Yeah, Sandeep, I think I can take it later in the group. That's
Okay.
fine.
okay.
So thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone, thank you. Thanks for joining today.
Great. Namaskar.
Okay.
Okay,
Namaste.
namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.